Back with another Jimmy Butler update here on Sunday morning. Hopefully everyone's enjoying their weekend. Heat fans, I'm Nic Rohloff. This is the Heat Report by Chat Sports. Because Butler's 2-game suspension has concluded. The suspension came in before the Thursday game against the Milwaukee Bucks after Butler missed the team flight. And the Heat went 1-1 in those games, getting blown out in Milwaukee and then bouncing back with a good win against the Nets on Saturday in Brooklyn. But now Butler's 2-game suspension's over. He's been suspended for 9 games over the past month and a half, and he is expected to rejoin the Miami Heat yet again on Monday as the Heat return back to Miami to host the Orlando Magic. And they also host the Cleveland Cavaliers on Wednesday, so a little 2-game homestand before they go back on the road to San Antonio on the weekend. But is Butler actually going to return? Because this past week I was predicting, and I changed my opinion from I don't think a trade actually happens between Miami and Phoenix to, I think this is going to be done by Sunday. Because after the Suns made that trade where they sent their 2031 first-round pick to get 3 first-rounders in 25, 27, 29, I was like, they only make that trade if they feel like they can use those picks to help facilitate this multi-team deal to ultimately land Jimmy Butler. But now that trade might have just been seen as a flexibility move to help them do a Jimmy Butler trade, or maybe help them go after other targets if they have to pivot from Jimmy Butler because other teams aren't willing to take Bradley Beal's contract. And before we get more into if Butler's going to rejoin the Heat in this latest interesting report from 5 Reasons Sports Network, let me know if you want this saga to be over. If you want the Jimmy Butler saga to be over, hit that like button. We've been covering it almost every single day. I'm getting exhausted from it. We're 11 days from the trade deadline. Hopefully we have a resolution soon, whether it's him staying on the team or whether it's him actually finally being traded. But hit that like button if you want this to be all over. The interesting report that I wanted to share is that Ethan Skolnick of 5 Reasons Sports Network reported today that the Heat are going to internally discuss their options with Jimmy Butler in terms of how they want to bring him back after this 2-game suspension. Because if you remember, after the 7-game suspension, he returned right back to the Miami Heat starting lineup. Played about 3 games, didn't really look that enthusiastic about playing on the court. It's not like he was walking out there, but he was 1,000% not giving it his 1,000% effort. And it arguably is more detrimental to the team that he's actually in the locker room, in the starting lineup, on the court, than away from the team. Because as long as he is on this team before the NBA trade deadline, he is going to be a distraction. He is going to be a major talking point. And I think it's not doing justice, and it's a disservice to the rest of the players on this team fighting their ass and playing their ass off every single day trying to earn wins for this Miami Heat ball club. So I think there's a lot of options that the Heat need to discuss, and we will talk about some of them on the back half of today's video. But I also wanted to share this intriguing note because I thought it was fascinating that 5 Reasons Sports Network reported that if he does rejoin the Miami Heat, there is a legitimate chance that they give Erik Spoelstra the power to make the decision on what to do with Butler, whether that's starting him in the first 5, whether that's bringing him off the bench, whether that's giving him a straight-up DNP. So I find it very fascinating that the Heat would be willing to give Erik Spoelstra that type of power. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but I'm just surprised that they would consider not even playing Jimmy Butler if he returned to the lineup, because everything's been said is that they are not in the business of paying someone $50 million to not play basketball when they are completely healthy. So I would be very intrigued to see, assuming he is not traded in the next 24 hours, that before that game against the Magic, if Erik Spoelstra is going to start Jimmy Butler, as long as Jimmy's in the locker room. It's a fascinating discussion. And let me get your thoughts on the matter. Should the Miami Heat start Jimmy Butler if he returns to the lineup on Monday? Type Y for yes or type N for no. Let me know if you think Jimmy should be the starting 3 for this Miami Heat group when he returns once again. I think there's a lot of different options that he can go about this. And as long as Jimmy's going to be returning to the roster, yes, I do think he should be in the starting lineup. Now, it's a different conversation to be had if he even should return to the lineup and to return to this locker room. Because is Jimmy Butler really going to go up in arms if Miami said, hey, man, we're not going to suspend you, but we don't want you around the team anymore? and we'll still pay you, but we don't want you around the team. And he just goes off and does his training and his side quest while Miami pays him. If Jimmy is okay with that, which I believe he would be, considering he doesn't want to play for the Miami Heat anymore, but he still wants to be paid, so he'll show up if he needs to get paid. I just think that might be the best course of action. It's time to move on, if you're asking me. And there's a specific scenario where I would welcome Jimmy Butler back into this locker room and back onto the Heat starting lineup. And we're going to discuss that situation and scenario in just a second. But I do got to give a shout out to our sponsor on today's show. That is Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform out there. It's so easy to play. All you do is pick more or less and at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. The big game is almost here, and you cannot miss out on the last football game of the season with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the big game. Prize Picks is also giving away a free pick for that game where one of the starting quarterbacks will only need to throw 1 yard to win. If you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. And if you're watching this on Sunday morning before the games, when this is being recorded, you can get in on the action for the 2 big games today in professional football with a free entry as well. Jaden Daniels more than half a passing yard. I paired that up in a specific pretty entry here that I showcased throughout the week with James Cook more than on yards, and we also had one with A.J. Brown more than a touchdown. I like Austin Eckler more than 19.5 yards as well through the receiving. There's so many different ways you can play. You can combine the games in the basketball world with the football world as well. It is truly the best way to play daily fantasy sports. They also have weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday they give you a select player projection up to 25% off to provide even more value for your lineups. So make sure you join me and the millions of others playing Prize Picks on a daily basis. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, as we get back to the discussion around Jimmy Butler, I think this is an intriguing scenario. I mentioned a little bit earlier in the video, there's 11 days until the NBA trade deadline. How about you just send him home and just let him kind of do his thing for those 11 days? Because here's the thing. It's only going to create more chaos around this Heat lineup as you get closer and closer to the deadline on February 6th. And to me, I think you don't want to risk injury either. If you do attempt and plan on trying to trade Jimmy Butler before the deadline, you don't want to get him hurt because then that will throw a wrench in everything. So why not just send Jimmy home? Seriously, just say, okay, Jimmy, we're going to try to trade you. We will pay you for the next 11 days, but just stay away from the Miami Heat. I think you'd be okay with that as the Heat try to potentially find him a new home before that February 6th deadline. But then here's the kicker, and here's the other part of this. If a trade does not materialize before February 6th and he is ultimately still on the Miami Heat roster and will be on the Heat roster until the offseason, where then he would make an intriguing decision of opting in and requesting a trade or opting out and trying to sign somewhere in free agency, you bring him back. Because here's the morality of the story. If he is on the Heat's roster past the February 6th deadline, it is his best interest to put back on a Miami Heat uniform and play well. Because if he is not traded, that means his future status is up in the air. And sure, he can opt in and request a trade and get somewhere and have more of a time frame in terms of late April. You can start maybe talking with some of these teams, but you're gonna have June, July, August, and September, right? And maybe a little bit of October to potentially find him a home for a trade. But if he opts out of his player option, then he will be a free agent. And the reason why it's important for him to put back on a Heat uniform if he's still on the team after the deadline is that he's got to up his value. If he wants to get the 3-year big-time contract, the 2-year supermax contract that he wants, he needs to play well and improve his value, because right now, with all the drama that's going on with Miami and the way he's looked this season, his value might be as low as it has been in 8 years? It might be that bad. And that's kind of my point in the matter here is if he wants to get the money he thinks he's deserved, he needs to play well for the Miami Heat if he's still on the roster after the trade deadline. So that's kind of why I think that line of thinking might be the best way to navigate this, if I'm going to be honest. Like, keep him away from the team. If you find a trade that you deal and deem necessary and good enough, okay, make the deal before the February 6th deadline. But if not, well, then you can bring Butler back to the roster, and it's in the best interest of Miami to try to make the postseason so they don't give up the picks in 26 and 28, and they finally convey in 25, 27, so you have more future picks to trade. Or you get his value up to make a trade. Like, it just makes sense for both sides to work here together post-deadline to have Butler back in the lineup. But I would keep him away for the next 11 days so he doesn't get hurt and the team doesn't have that complete distraction leading up to that February 6th trade deadline. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Make sure you are subscribed because we'll be live again Monday evening for Heat Magic. We'll see what Miami ultimately does with Jimmy Butler as his 2-game suspension is up. We're also covering the Miami Heat on a daily basis and leading the coverage in NBA trade rumors around Miami on YouTube before that deadline on February 6th. So hit that sub button. Join us here at the channel. Go Heat.